Hello, and welcome to our discussion today focused on edge computing. I'm Michael Patterson, leader of systems engineering here at Scale Computing, and I'm joined by Mike Lyon, who recently came over as an SE from the product team, where he was focused over there primarily on our edge strategy. Mike, thanks for teaming up on this topic.
Yeah, you bet. Glad to be here.
Well, getting right into it, let's define what we mean by edge computing. Simply stated, edge is any infrastructure or mission-critical applications that run outside the four walls of the corporate data center. And this could be anything from a remote office to ships in the sea. More and more, we're being called upon to deliver high-performant, highly available systems out in the field where uptime, response, and continuity can all be guaranteed. And here on this slide, you can see examples like retail outlets, casinos, and dealerships. These are just a few of the edge deployments we've served, and we'll talk about some more of these in detail here in a bit. So Mike, we're talking edge scenarios. I referenced the ship at sea and how quickly servicing an outage there poses its own unique challenge. But for everyday edge environments in general, what are the factors and requirements driving that demand?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to speak to all 4 points here, but I really want to talk about regulation and data explosion first, as those are really kind of feeding each other. And when we think about these 4 drivers that we see here, regulation and data explosion are really driving a lot. They're driving a lot of the innovation around form factor. They're driving a lot of storage needs, especially as it relates to regulation. Compliance and privacy laws are really making it difficult and implicating traditional infrastructure in its inability to scale properly down for edge deployments. The data now needs to be local, easily accessible, but also secure and kept for, regulated amounts of time in some instances. And because those compliance and privacy and regulatory pressures are requiring that more and more data to be stored and to be archived and to be acted upon, the sheer quantity of data that we're generating is enormous, and it's growing exponentially on a daily basis. So regulations are also driving requirements for accessibility. That data must be highly available, resilient to failures and insulated from bad actors, but also, low latency. And lastly, given that more data is now available, it's not always practical to place that vital data where decisions must be made quickly in a high latency environment like cloud. You need things to be adjacent to where those workloads are. And latency really then becomes everything when you're operating at the edge. So data locality and having an efficient stack really becomes the easiest way to eliminate latency, store it safely adjacent to the workload. So that's just kind of a quick summary of the 4 key drivers that are driving edge computing.
All right, thanks, Mike. The trend of edge computing is red hot, and it represents one of the fastest growing trends I've seen in the market, at least in recent times. And today, estimations are just about 10% of enterprise data is being captured outside the data center, yet in just 12 to 18 months, that figure is expected to leap up to 50%. And that's a massive explosion of data collected at the edge. And whether we hit 50%, that 50% metric, or even just 20 to 30%, there's still a need to serve here. And therein lies the opportunity for us. So Mike, you talked about what is driving edge deployments. What challenges do we run into from a management standpoint?
Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about this in more detail, but simplicity really is vital for edge deployments because you're talking about larger scale deployments, possibly and likely, into the hundreds or thousands. So being able to grow and go from day zero, installing and deploying the hardware and workloads at scale, to day N, where you're monitoring the health and managing those workloads again at scale, it's incredibly important to be able to deploy quickly and have a simple management layer. Because the likelihood is that those edge sites, they may be environmentally inaccessible, or they may not have adequate IT expertise. Having a simple platform, again, that becomes centrally managed where you don't have to depend on remote resources, helps to overcome some of those obstacles. And again, as we talk about, the end state of your deployment, as life goes on, the need for automation and orchestration really is just as important as it is to have a self-healing architecture. You know, systems should be able to withstand failures, continue operating, especially considering like the fact that I mentioned earlier, there may be environmental or accessibility issues. There's simply no staff at all to immediately address, you know, failed components or deal with the system hands-on. So it all comes down to simplicity and automation.
All right. Very good. And I mean, so with that, I mean, we're getting some perspective on, you know, these edge deployments, the requirements there. From the infrastructure challenge side, I want to highlight that and talk about what that means to deployments. So we haven't introduced scale computing yet as an organization, but regarding our core business, back in 2012, we set out to simplify the complexity of legacy virtualization in the data center by collapsing all these separate components here, represented by many different vendors, into a single appliance. And you can see it looks like this. This vision included the software, redundant networking, and total support, all delivered by a single vendor. Now, by nesting 3 or more of these appliances for high availability and the software management layer built in, this is made for a simple and extremely reliable solution for thousands of customers. And this same design can be applied at the edge, but cost and form factor quickly become an issue. And so this is where scale computing, this is where we have a huge advantage to serve the market. I mean, full-sized XU appliances work well in the data center, but as you move into non-data center environments where even a data closet might not be available, how do we answer to that? And for us, it's innovation in the software layer. So Mike, I want you to, if you can cover, you know, what about our solution addresses both the cost and form factors at the edge?
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. And first, let's talk again about the problem that we're trying to solve, you know, because it seemed like the traditional architecture that we look at with physical hosts and separate storage, you know, and that the biggest liability there was the storage component, kind of like that previous slide alluded to. You know, the storage layer is expensive, it's sophisticated, it's extremely difficult to scale. You know, it requires, you know, fluencies in specific technologies, et cetera. And when hyperconverged infrastructure was conceived, it was really the idea of placing the storage layer adjacent to the compute layer. So you get rid of that costly and cumbersome storage liability, the protocol overhead, and that by default reduces your complexity and cost. Now, what other vendors did to solve that problem was basically just to virtualize that storage layer or literally virtualize the SAN. And that approach works, but you're basically taking the storage management out of the equation, but at a tremendous cost of resources. You know, the overhead of simply virtualizing the SAN and getting those virtual SAN appliances powered on to where you can create VMs is, you know, 50 to 100 gigs of memory per node. You know, Scale took a different approach, really staying true to what the definition of HCI really is. And, you know, just to look at how that efficiency matters on the right hand with our block engine, at the most, 4 gigs of memory is going to be used, with that being as low as 1 to 2 gigs for smaller platforms that are more common in edge deployments. Whereas on the left, you know, the competitive approach to a virtual SAN really has an impact in both the IO path as well as resource overhead. Again, taking, you know, about 50 to 100 gigs of memory plus the cores just to turn on the lights. Now, this is a good way to visualize, you know, resource availability, and talking about what does that VSA actually mean and how does that impact my available resource. And as we start to go into resource profiles that might more resemble edge workloads, which would be smaller and require fewer resources, the ability to scale down for the virtual SAN really diminishes when you've got less than 64 gigs of memory available in the system. So if you want to start traversing down to smaller platforms, the VSA overhead, start to look to the right, or the task of just managing storage, consumes more resources than would even be available on smaller, leaner form factors and platforms, which again are far more tailored to edge workloads. So beyond 64 gigs of memory, the VSA overhead that we discussed really becomes more of a liability and it becomes impossible to run workloads really below 32 gigs in a given environment.
Very cool. Very cool. So bringing this back to scale computing's key differentiators and our fit for the edge, these are the key tenets that have earned us, that early market leader position in edge. From a simplicity standpoint, I'll just go around the horn here. We've designed our edge product to require little to no IT expertise to install and deploy it. And in some cases, it's literally a plug it in and turn it on, and the system does the rest. Regarding availability, Scale runs atop 24 patents for storage and orchestration. That innovation is our bread and butter. And for the cost of a single server, you can deploy a 3-node edge cluster that is self-healing and can handle outages without disruption to your production environment. Furthermore, we include a full feature set. Backup and replication are part of the solution. That is not an extra cost. As our name suggests, talking about scalability, our system is just that. I mean, we can scale up or out over time with no downtime when adding new resources. We guarantee backwards compatibility with new releases, which protects your investment and allows you to mix and match gear as you grow. And also, I might add that, that allows you to easily grow when needed, which means you get to save your budget until it's needed. And that, again, just leads to, the affordability tenet. Our affordability really comes from a few things. First, running an efficient environment where you're paying less in overhead, as Mike just outlined, that reduction in overhead, just reduces the cost to get the system in place. And this not only means that you're paying less for the hardware, but with the management software included, there's also no more annual licensing costs to run that environment. And with centralized control and management, Mike, I'm going to have you speak to that. Can you just walk us through the key points here for centralized control?
Sure, I'll talk through these and actually demo them in a bit more detail, but really centralized control it's a keystone component of a successful edge deployment. The central control means going beyond just a unified view of the health. It's providing automation to ensure that, firmware updates are completed, and even orchestration of your edge workloads that goes up into the guest level to manage application and policy deployment. In orchestration, it's a word that's often overused, but it really boils down to having a central point that provides the optics and control channels necessary to manage large-scale deployments. And that's what we've provided as part of the product.
Thank you. All right, so you mentioned the demo. Before we get there, I just want to quickly introduce our range of product families. You'll see here, we've got solutions to address the data center and the edge, and this is regardless to size. For smaller, large organizations, whatever that environment calls for, we can tailor the proper build. We've got, 4 and 12 drive systems that mix SSD with spinning disk to balance cost and performance, or we've got 1 or 10 drive all NVMe systems when we need to deliver optimal performance where it's needed. Now, our software, we don't license our software by feature, meaning that no matter what system you deploy, you get full functionality to go with it. That's all the way up and down the stack. And we also don't tier our support, meaning that everybody gets the same level of 24/7 support, which again, I'll speak to here in a bit. But specific to Edge, our HE150 family is designed to accommodate the smallest of environments where maybe just a few critical VMs need to run. You're not limited to deploying only 3 nodes, but 3 nodes is where high availability comes in. And our approach, we're able to bring that high availability with the starting of a 3-node cluster for just around the cost of a single server environment on competing platforms. So very aggressive there, a lot of upside benefit. And then for those edge deployments where, there's larger resource requirements or heavier workloads, We've got the HE500 family, which is slightly larger in form factor, but it's still smaller than a traditional server. And here again, you've got options for configuration, so we can tailor, whatever that combination of resource requirements are for your site. So I think, Mike, we've talked enough to set the stage. Let's jump in and show the product in action. If you'll take us through the UI, how to create VMs and manage that environment, I think it's a good time to do that.
I agree. Thanks, Mike. We'll get to the fun part now. So what you're looking at right now is a 3-node HC3 edge cluster. And I'm not using a client, nor is there one required, nor is there a management server that's providing the underlying clustering or HA. This is all driven through a browser, and Scale is handling the clustering of the nodes in the back end automatically. And each of these boxes on top represent an individual compute node in this 3-node cluster. And then the VMs are represented here, as you can see, as slices. So each node has 16 gigs of memory with about 1 gig reserved for overhead. So again, you're provided with about 15 gigs per node of workload overhead. And across the top, you can see we get a cluster-wide view of the resources, CPU, memory, storage. We can drill further into your storage detail to see, what your gains from dedupe are, for example, or just what your distribution of VM data versus snapshot data looks like. And before I go further, I kind of want to point out that, the entire deployment of a cluster, including the deployment of workloads and VMs, as well as the customization of them once they're online, can be completely automated without any hands-on assistance, interaction, or intervention required. So this is something that can be automated and orchestrated remotely, which is especially helpful if you're deploying at scale. And even configuring a cluster manually, that process takes less than an hour and can realistically be done in less than a half hour, because you're not configuring hosts and then installing a hypervisor and then management software and then configuring and presenting storage. You're basically initializing the cluster with an IP address, and then a few minutes later, it's available to log in through a web interface. Now let's go back and look at the VM creation process real quick, and I'll walk you through how simple that is. And I almost always use the analogy of HC3 as an on-premises private cloud. And if you can remember why we loved the cloud originally, it was because it was simple. I could create a VM, and the cloud provider is handling the resources for me, making sure they're highly available and that they're fault tolerant. You just provided the needed architecture. So with one click, you could just create a VM as simply as if you were on a cloud platform here. I'm not specifying resources or host affinity. I'm really giving it the architecture. Okay, this is the VM I need with 2 CPU, 4 gigs of memory, maybe a 200 gig disk. And now I can power that VM on. So just like you were having that cloud-like simplicity. And again, the life cycle of the VMs and the workloads doesn't end there. As Mike mentioned, we do have data protection as well through the use of our snapshots. Our snapshots are lightweight. They do not impede I/O performance. And you can create schedules to retain snapshots that are going to meet your RPO needs. And furthermore, snapshots can be replicated to other scale clusters or single nodes, giving you true offsite DR. Snapshots are also at the VM level as well as the VM disk and volume level. So if I didn't necessarily need to clone a VM from an entire snapshot, which I'll do now just to show you what that process looks like, if I just needed to restore maybe the individual volume from an hour ago, I can actually do that as well. So it's providing, almost the file level, it's providing the foundation for file level recovery, without touching any third-party software. You can also see there's a firmware update available. And should I choose to apply that, this would be done completely non-disruptively. The update process handles the migration of all the VMs if necessary, if the nodes need to be restarted. We'll never take VMs offline. Now, before I move on and demonstrate and talk about Nucleus, our edge portal, it's important to remember that all of these functions can also be automated through our API. So if you already have, an existing fluency in scripting or automating with REST APIs, there's a lot that you can do But let's also think about the fact that this is designed to be as simple as possible. So our API is also extremely easy to consume. But let's talk about management automation and take a look at Nucleus. So this is our edge management platform. It's a powerful mission control style panel that's providing immediate optics to the sites in your deployment where attention is really needed. Nucleus lets you visualize your edge fleet deployment. Our edge console provides really an operation-centric view of data from remote sites, in addition to a robust, configuration and change management orchestration system. But really, a single console interface to both, monitor and manage your remote sites, drive change and configuration management policies, update the applications and workloads. The sites are individually reporting severity, health, resource usage. And then up here, we're providing a visualization of the sites that really need attention first. So we've got a condition heat map where I can see my most unhealthy sites. I can drill in to see specifically what's going on at that site. In this case, I've got capacity, and I can look at maybe how in the past hour to half hour, some of those conditions may have been changing. So I can immediately drill in and get access to those remote sites to see what's going on. And moving through the right, we see online and offline metrics. These are more availability than health metrics, as it simply means that sites are unreachable. And in larger edge deployments, this may be, an acceptable state or an expected state, especially if you have sites that are going to have intermittent connectivity. If they're in a maritime deployment using satellite internet, if a storm comes by or they've got extremely high latency, they may not be reporting in. That's to be expected. So we also visualize that in a heat map format up here, so you can see, okay, maybe I have some sites where I'm not expecting them to be offline. And again, I can drill in and do some troubleshooting. And then on the far right, lastly, this is the cluster deployment lifecycle. So I talked about it briefly, but you can automate your deployment through Nucleus, including the ability to deploy clusters to your sites without having to deal with any on-premises configuration work once they've been shipped, other than plugging them in and powering on. So collecting all the data and visualizing it, again, we've got condition history. I've got fleet-wide utilization of all my resources, as well as conditions, so things that I may want to take action on. All this data is being passed securely, and the remote sites report up through port 443. As far as actually getting the data in, it's very easy to manage your data footprint. This is all managed via Excel, so we provide templates where you can download and upload sites, as well as nodes. And the site and node and tags are helpful really to help drive some of the orchestration, including, being able to specify firmware updates by tag if I wanted to apply upgrades to specific sites. As we look at the dashboard and start to go a little bit down the menu here, on the farther end, we've included an orchestration and automation engine. So this is going to allow you to manage and conduct versioning operations, again, all through one console, all driven through Ansible. So application versions and life cycles can be centrally managed from patches to security updates within Windows. And you can operationally drive that automation, at the individual site or groups of site levels, again, using tags to group your data into meaningful objects. And the execution environment's secure. So it's using an isolated container for the actual playbook execution. And these playbooks can be easily defined and developed using our REST API as well as our Ansible module. And we've got a number of examples and samples available today. So overall, we've got both the optimal configuration and an efficient platform for your remote sites, as well as a dashboard and a platform to manage the ongoing health and keep that fleet up and running and understand where you've got problems, where you've got critical sites, but also being able to manage the life cycle, the firmware, the applications. I'll pass it back to you, Mike.
Very good. Thank you, Mike. Before I move on, you made reference to our API, and I wondered if you want to just throw a few highlights out about our API, what that enables for our customers.
Yep, and we just talked about what automation is really capable of. And the same level of automation and orchestration is available through our REST API. So you can really take advantage of the full control that's available through our API to customize your VM deployment workloads, even provide and build your own dashboards for visualization of specific metrics that are relevant to the needs of your specific edge deployments. So there's a lot of automation that's available, and the API really is the perfect tool to really apply those automation policies out to larger deployments.
All right. So thanks for that walkthrough, Mike. That was great. To take a step back, we've mentioned our role in the data center and also the opportunity at the edge. Here, I wanted to take a quick look at the full solution architecture that many of our edge customers employ. And you'll see here in the center the main clusters in the data center. And perhaps there's a couple of secondary HQ or regional sites that are running a subset of the same. Then, over here, you've got a plethora of edge installations doing their thing and reporting, the workload and data set back to corporate. This is what a total solution looks like, delivered by scale. And, we'll do this better, cleaner, and more cost effective than anybody in the market today. It's very cool stuff, and we're very proud of it. So part of the solution, I mentioned support earlier. I want to come back to it here because our good story doesn't stop at the gear. We're known and rated best in the HCI segment for our excellence in support, customer support. We're a 24/7 support organization, all staffed centrally in Indianapolis, Indiana. We don't really have tier one techs that will muddle through some, qualifying list questions before routing you to a more capable resource. It's likely the person answering the call that's going to be the one resolving your issue. And this is, really important from a customer stat standpoint. Currently, our call times are very, very minimal. I think we're averaging well under 20 seconds right now. And if you're in a situation as a customer where you've got an issue that's come up, it's unexpected, and you don't have time to manage it because you're out the door on a Friday afternoon or, whatever the case might be, when you call into support, you can provide a security code. We'll open up a secure tunnel. And once we get that connection, you're free to go. We'll do the assessment and the diagnosis for you. We essentially become a part of your team from a support standpoint, and our customers absolutely love that. So I want to hit on just a couple of real-world examples. And Mike, I've pulled a couple of our edge customers up for review. We walked through these. I want to hit Dell Haas in a bit more detail, and then I'm going to quickly highlight a couple of other industry examples. But you want to take the ball here and just talk to what this deployment was like?
Sure, absolutely. So Dell Haas is one of the world's largest grocers and facing the same challenge that really every business in every industry is facing, regardless of their size, of doing more with less. And specific to their problem, over the last few years, I think we've all seen this even in our own shopping experiences. The brick and mortar shopping experience has really changed, with that entire experience being more interactive than before. And this media interactive experience of shopping requires infrastructure that has to be on premises to deliver these applications, because the latency for 300 customers trying to connect to a cloud gateway just wouldn't work. So everything from dynamic signage to security and loss prevention, more hardware really wasn't the answer to the challenge of converging these applications, including IoT applications, onto a single platform. So Dell Haas worked closely with Scale to develop a single platform that they called One Box, which really was an edge cluster designed to handle all of their workloads. It was highly available, easy to deploy, centrally managed, fully fault tolerant. And as their needs evolved, Scale has been the defendable and scalable platform that's provided them the catalyst to confidently deploy their mission critical applications on this platform at the edge. And again, you can see there's quite a bit of diversity in what your standard brick and mortar store is actually running, and we're able to put that on a single architecture that was centrally managed, to the scale of thousands. And I think perhaps the most powerful messaging comes in how they were able to reduce their TCO and their management overhead while providing downtime, zero downtime since March of 2018. And as time goes on, I think this metric and quote becomes more and more powerful and really underscores how a highly available edge computing platform can really transform the deployment of any size or scale.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. All right, I'm not going to go into the depth of details on these other deployments, but I do want to highlight some of the other verticals that we often encounter as classic edge opportunities. And I'll toss a customer logo out as an affiliate there. But physician practices and dental clinics are very common for us. Rhesus Dental, it's one of our customers in this space. We really found a very common profile across other groups and clinic networks like that. Where some of the office functions are moving up to the cloud. They've got some site-specific applications that absolutely have to be able to run there in order for the clinic or site to do their business, and no IT resources at those locations. So this is a very common profile for us in that vertical space. Logistics and remote site deployments, these are my personal favorites. I mean, whether we're talking about ships or oil platforms in the middle of the ocean or remote mining camps, I mean, these are where we get some of our most enthusiastic customers. When they discover what's possible on a tight budget, they just don't expect what we're able to deliver. And these are really, in particular, fun solutions to pursue in partnership. So you've had a good look. We've covered how we're innovating at the edge and what our solution looks like. We're making edge as performant and feature complete at scale as a data center installation would be. And at this point, I want to profile scale computing, so you know who's behind all this. Here at Scale, we're not new to the game. In fact, we had a hand in creating this space. Scale released its first HCI product back in 2012. We actually coined the term hyperconvergence. And we didn't know at the time that it would stick as it has, but our focus back then really was about providing turnkey systems for small to middle-sized businesses with an innovative approach to the software and costing pieces. And if you fast forward to now, we're serving all verticals of industry, many different types and sizes of businesses, and we've really amassed a fabulous amount of market recognition for our technology and customer service. And upon that, we've been able to forge some elite relationships within the ecosystem. And edge, it wasn't a thing for us back in 2012, but our innovative design back then did set the foundation, and it's paying huge dividends now as we're poised to deliver edge like nobody else can. So when I talk about fabulous market recognition, we measure that by customer testimonials and the attention we get from industry press. We're the most highly rated hyperconverged solution in the market, and we have over 700 published case studies, which to me is crazy. I've worked for some very large organizations with great products, and amassing that number of case studies and customer testimonials is pretty tough to do. So we're very proud that our customer base is willing to speak and make these testimonials on our behalf. But perhaps our most prestigious accomplishments to date really have happened in the last 2 years. We unseated VMware as the longtime incumbent for the best HCI and best virtualization solution, but we most recently took the cake for the #1 vendor in edge computing. And that's awesome. I mean, we really recognize the trend in the marketplace. We're very, very well poised to deliver on that. And, we feel some exciting times are here both for us and our customer base. So to close this out, I'll just share a brand slide that shows some of the customers that are currently taking advantage of our solution and partnering with us for the future. Mike, I want to thank you very much for your time. Great job on covering the technical aspects of this. And, for those that are watching, we hope that you found this to be informative and, more importantly, a potential fit for your organization. If that's the case, please feel free to contact us by emailing info@scalecomputing.com or call us at the number here. We look forward to hearing from you, and thanks again for your time today.